Hi everyone and welcome to another obscure Asian story.
In Japan, apples are very popular as gifts, especially as souvenirs from apple-growing regions. In Japan, apples are mostly cultivated by manual labor over the span of a year. From the end of January through March, Aomori is still in deep snow. Regardless of the frost, work must begin. Training and pruning allows each tree to get sunlight to its branches. This task requires the most professional technique. A common saying in Aomori is, if you don't prune 1,000 trees, you won't become an adult. And Japan is very proud of its domestic products, and as history shows, sometimes a bit too proud. In the 1980s and 90s, Japan fiercely protected its domestic industries. Bureaucrats went to absurd lengths, spreading propaganda about dirty foreign produce and claiming it was unsuitable for unique Japanese psychology. However, the economic bubble burst and real estate investments no longer sustained the overpriced Japanese produce. Desperate to feed everyone, the government had to open up imports. Enter Akio Tanii, a scientist. On October 11, 1995, he staggered into his lab. Distressed and bleary-eyed, he had been missing, under stress, and was sent home to rest. Tragically, he fell seriously ill and died that night after drinking pesticide. Tanii's death was unnoticed by the public, but behind the scenes it was linked to a heated trade dispute between Japan and the US. His research had revealed a strain of the bacterium Erwinia amylivora in Japan, a disease causing fire blight in apples and pears. This contradicted Japan's claim of being disease-free and disrupted their trade policy that blocked US apple imports. Collaborating with US scientists, Tanii faced backlash from Japanese farmers and bureaucrats. The Japanese Agriculture Ministry denied the disease was fire blight, illustrating how officialdom can bully those who deviate from the sanctioned path. Tanii's story also highlights how politics can taint science. In the world of apples, pears, and trade diplomacy, Japan's bureaucrats had long insisted that the nation was free from a certain disease. They used this claim to justify a trade policy that blocked imported apples from the United States. However, this stance was challenged when Cornell Professor Stephen Beer published a paper. Tanii, a quiet and diligent scientist, worked with his colleague Osamu Tamura in the late 1970s. They studied deceased pear trees and discovered that they were infected by a variant of Erwinia amylivora, the bacterium responsible for fire blight. This bacterium, related to the one causing the bubonic plague, likely originated in America's Hudson Valley centuries ago. It spread to Europe and the Middle East, leaving its characteristic charred mark on trees. At the time, Japan was considered free of fire blight, along with Chile, South Africa, China, and Australia. However, Japan's Agriculture Ministry disagreed with Tanii's findings and asked them to stop their research. Tanii reluctantly called the disease shoot blight of pear instead of fire blight. Meanwhile, Washington state apple growers faced surplus crops in the 1970s and sought overseas markets. Japan, though technically open to imports, still restricted foreign produce due to concerns about introducing pests and diseases. Despite efforts by US growers to address scientific objections, Japan remained unsatisfied. In the mid-1980s, Japan's focus shifted back to fire blight. Even after USDA scientists demonstrated that healthy apples couldn't transmit the pathogen, Japan continued to raise new issues. Tanii's research, like most Japanese studies, was published only in Japanese and didn't reach Western experts. Since it seemed to affect only a few farmers and faced discouragement, Tanii and Tamura stopped working on the disease. Tanii was pressured to name the disease BPSP and halt the research. They sent almost all the isolated bacterial strains to the Yokohama Plant Protection Station for follow-up research. Unfortunately, Tanii never received any feedback from the lab. In 1992, Beer stumbled upon a Japanese textbook describing a disease similar to fire blight. He connected with Tanii, who sent him original bacterial strains from 1977. Beer and his colleagues confirmed that while the bacterium wasn't as harmful as American and European forms, it did cause fire blight. Surprisingly, it could infect both apple and pear trees. With Tanii's help, Beer proved that BPSP was just a Japanese strain of Erwinia amylivora, revealing it as a euphemism for fire blight. Beer presented these findings at a plant pathologists conference in Canada, leading Australia to ban pear imports from Japan. Meanwhile, Japanese officials ordered the removal of pear trees within 40 yards of infected areas. Farmers were upset, considering it politically motivated decision. Tanii, once respected, became a scapegoat, and he even offered to resign. A few days later, Tanii had contacted his boss, Fujio Kodama, who was the director of the plant pathology department at the Hokkaido station. Tanii informed Kodama that he had received a second article by Beer, which was intended for submission to the academic journal Plant Disease. Kodama expressed concern that the article might escalate tension. Tanii was also worried about an upcoming meeting with a farmers group during which he was expected to apologize for his research. Tragically, on October 11th, Tanii took his own life. Following Tanii's death, the Japanese Agriculture Ministry implemented an ordinance. This regulation required researchers seeking to take disease samples outside the affected region to obtain permission from the Agriculture Minister. Unfortunately, this made it nearly impossible for Japanese researchers to collaborate with scientists overseas. In response to Tanii's passing, a tense meeting was held at the Agriculture Ministry. During this meeting, 3 government-affiliated organizations decided to replicate Beer's experiments. Japan has argued that although the bacterium in question appeared to be Arvenia amylivora, the disease's cause was not fireblight, a conclusion disputed by experts like Beer. The Japanese government went to great lengths to challenge the information. They made Tanii's previous bacterial samples unavailable and asserted that while the bacterium was indeed present, the resulting disease was not fireblight. On the other hand, the situation created significant challenges for apple importers. It wasn't until 1993, when then U.S. Trade Representative Miki Cantor threatened sanctions, that Japan offered a compromise. U.S. growers could ship 2 varieties of American apples, Red and Golden Delicious, provided they followed a strict and costly regimen. Washington farmers reluctantly agreed, and by 1994 they were allowed to export apples to Tokyo. However, the process hasn't been smooth. Despite an initially positive start, sales have declined. Many growers find the stringent Japanese requirements burdensome. For instance, Mike Saunders, a prominent grower from the Northwest Fruit and Produce Co., faced additional costs. His company had to pay for Japanese inspectors to fly in, house them, and cover the expenses for up to 67 days each year. These inspectors oversaw the harvest, ensuring that apples from designated parcels were boxed separately and stored in cold warehouses for 60 days. The apples were even treated with higher than normal chlorine concentrations to prevent disease transmission. Moreover, Japanese import restrictions favored 2 apple varieties least appealing to the Japanese taste for sweet dessert apples. Meanwhile, Japanese growers who previously had withheld smaller apples now flooded the market with them to compete against imports. After the research was published, the U.S. side aimed to demonstrate that neither American nor Japanese apple varieties should impact apple trade. Their argument was that the disease couldn't be carried by healthy apples. This story came to light in 1996, a year after Tanii's tragic death. Tanii had dedicated his life to assisting local farmers, yet he found himself expected to apologize for his research. Sadly, he fell ill the night before the meeting and passed away, likely due to pesticide poisoning. Even by 1996, the future of American apple imports to Japan remained uncertain. For over 2 decades, Japan had essentially banned American apples due to fireblight restrictions, a disease affecting fruit trees. In 2005, the WTO panel agreed with the U.S. position, affirming that any hypothetical concerns about fireblight disease spread could be addressed by restricting apple exports to mature, symptomless fruit.
I hope you enjoyed this video. See you next time, and thanks for watching!